Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Tonic Accord. We are going to be talking about the most notable and some of our personal favorite political films. These are films or TV series or shows that have to do with politics, specifically U.S. politics, but maybe some other types of politics. But at least they address some key things in politics and some interesting, notable ideas, and we're going to dive right into it. Some of our just personal favorites. These are not, the best films in history. These are not, it's all subjective. It's all opinion-based. But we wanted to kind of go over some of the films and TV series that we like that has to do with politics, something more light and fun this time round. All right, let's get into it, Alex. What's your first one? What's your first one on the list?
Okay, so if you want to know I guess I'll just start kind of light here. Let's go with the Manchurian Candidate, the 1960s one, not the recent one, which was horrible. But this is a great political thriller by John Frankenheimer, and obviously featuring Frank Sinatra, and it's some amazing acting by him. I think, this is a movie that, as time has gone on, has been more and more prevalent. I mean, it's the idea of basically being able to use somewhat of a quasi-undercover military operative, and then all of a sudden, through brainwashing techniques, he's able to become an agent of the communist state, and he becomes an assassin. And I could go into this, for ages, but I think a lot of people do know at least the idea of the Manchurian Candidate. And for me, it's cool because this is a movie that there were actual projects going on in the 50s and 60s involving almost kind of I guess you could call it an early version of cyber warfare, right? Like something where you can basically hack into an individual and have them act at an arm of the government. And so, you have Frank Sinatra is a politician, military man, and he basically is triggered to do something for the enemies of the United States. And so, yeah, that was a pretty horrible description of that movie that I put out there, but now when we talk about foreign influence in elections with Russia and all this stuff, it's kind of interesting to think that this idea, the CIA during the Cold War in the 50s was thinking about this, and a good movie came out of it.
It kind of reminds me of, because, there's a lot of themes in that film, like the whole, like, McCarthyism, because, like, the one guy's super against communism, and then I think his wife and then his son get, like, they get programmed to be part of the communists. That whole, like, Red Scare. But what also reminds me of is Lee Harvey Oswald, the guy who shot JFK, who I think he was he wasn't like brainwashed and programmed, but he was certainly like obsessed with communism and obsessed with like Eastern politics, and like he even wanted to go to Russia and like learn about communism, and he was like apathetic towards Cuba, and how just like completely absorbed he was with that whole thing. And went against his his birth culture of like American values. There was also a guy on I forget, it was like a Vice documentary, but it was like this dude that was born in Spain, super European, Western European democracies, but he got obsessed with North Korean dictator communism, and he like defected to North Korea. Like, how many people defect to North Korea? The Manchurian Candidate sounds like something so ridiculous and crazy, but it does happen. And it's just kind of crazy that it does happen. Like, some people just get super obsessed with a certain political ideology and then just go way down that rabbit hole, almost against self-interest.
Yeah, man. And, this is like, without going too far down the rabbit hole, MK Ultra, the Charles Manson, like all that stuff. I mean, MK Ultra was the CIA's practically brainwashing attempt to get people that were normal U.S. citizens to all of a sudden be able to kind of snap and go, commit acts for the U.S. government.
Right. Yeah, they try. I mean, it didn't really work, but they tried. They certainly tried.
Right.
I also heard that during that phase of like the CIA, they were like drugging each other with LSD as like jokes and pranks. Man, that's crazy. That's not a workplace environment I want to be a part of. But
me neither.
All right, well, that's a good start. The Manchurian Candidate, considered a Hollywood classic. I'm gonna go also with a Hollywood classic here, Citizen Kane, 1941. Obviously this film is a lot more than just politics. It's considered one of the best films in history. It broke boundaries in filmmaking for so many different reasons and But we're not here to. I'm not a film critic. But it is about a media mogul who turned into a politician. And a guy from Time Magazine, one of their senior film critics, Richard Corliss, he had a really good description of the film, and he says Kane is a media magnate who runs for office. This essentially is a film about a powerful man's need to be loved by the millions of people whose lives he dominates. I thought that was super interesting. And think of like other people in this realm of like Michael Bloomberg, right? Someone who dominates certain industries as a media mogul, has been a politician, not successful in the presidency, but successful in New York politics, right? And he's just at a completely different level, like a plane of success and existence than the average human being. And so Citizen Kane shows kind of like that. I mean, Citizen Kane was kind of based off of William Randolph Hearst in one way, but in many other ways, it was just kind of Orson Welles' conglomerate of powerful people into one man. And so, I think the most poignant scene is where it's when Kane is actually like about to win or lose his election, and his own personal printing press, his paper has two versions of the headline, and it's one reads Kane elected, and then the other one reads fraud at the polls. And they're just waiting to see what happens before they run these already predetermined headlines. And I thought that was super interesting because, I bet you that's how it is for some of these guys that are just so powerful, so successful in other industries, and then they want to go into politics. You could argue Donald Trump is like that. Someone who was super successful by certain metrics in business, and I do think that someone like Trump, someone like Michael Bloomberg, have this need to be loved by the millions, right? Have this powerful need, like powerful men that want to be loved by the millions of people who in reality they actually control and dominate in one way or another. Dominate is such a heavy word, but as far as Citizen Kane, it's a great representation, and I think it's just a superb film in showing the personality behind the kinds of people that get into politics.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. That's a movie that I need to revisit. I probably saw it when I was like 15. So, it was early enough where I understand that it's a powerful film, but I need to watch it again and get all the specifics back. But definitely. I mean, I like how I feel like the movie kind of almost is a prelude or even foreshadowing to kind of where we are in politics now.
Yeah.
I mean, ever since then, I mean, I'll never forget, I think it was Harry Truman. He was predicted to lose the election. And there's a great, I don't know, when you mentioned what happened in the movie, it takes me back to when Truman's waving a newspaper that says Truman defeated. And, this is right after he wins the election after FDR's death.
Right.
And I almost think the movie also kind of foreshadows to where we're at today. The yellow journalism of people like William Randolph Hearst. And, I think we've seen that I don't think we'd even call it yellow journalism anymore. Now it's just kind of journalism.
Right.
And it's kind of interesting to see that, yeah, this movie I think was way ahead of its time, and just kind of its unprecedented voice about media and media moguls and power. No, it's definitely interesting. I think that's a good movie. Yeah, I do need to rewatch it again though, because honestly, I forget a lot of specifics.
Yeah, what Rosebud is or whatever. Well, I think the big one is too, just like that fraud at the polls. When he pulls up fraud at the polls, I bet you, whatever happens in November, I bet you we're going to see that headline.
I guarantee you we're going to see that headline. Like, there's no freaking way we're not going to, man.
Yeah. All right, what's your number two?
Let me think here. Okay, this is an interesting one. It's a comedy, and it's called Election. Okay. And it's by Alexander Payne. He's the guy who did Sideways, The Descendants. There was another one like The Life of Schmidt or something like that.
Okay, yeah.
He's a great comedy director. But Election was one of his first movies, and it was Reese Witherspoon's breakout role, where she plays Tracy Flick. And this is a high school election movie. And it's about this hardworking girl who's, student body president, wants to become a politician, hardworking, and everyone around her makes fun of her. They doubt her. And Matthew Broderick is in it as a social studies teacher who also has like this weird fixation with her. And he's always trying to ruin her because she's working too hard. And basically, in a nutshell, this Flick archetype, as they later call it, kind of influenced, Leslie Knope in Parks and Rec.
Yeah.
And a lot of people even say it was the beginning kind of it was almost a metaphor for Hillary Clinton, someone like Hillary Clinton, who's this hardworking gal who is, has dedicated her life to public service, and all she gets is kind of sexist and classist circumstances around her. So it's a really funny movie, but also she's kind of this anti-hero by default, when in fact she's kind of the new age of women politicians. And I think this movie came out in the early 2000s or late 90s. So it almost kind of set the scene for that strong city council Leslie Knope, or the Sarah Palin figure, the Hillary Clinton figure. And it was just kind of an interesting movie that's funny, but also disturbing in some parts of it.
I don't think I've ever seen it, but I have seen the trailer for it, where she's like stamping all the like the pins and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like when I was in high school, I related more towards like the other guy. Like I remember the people that were super into student government. They were always like theater kids that were also in the super like student government. They were in like 7 clubs. And I remember for some reason, I was just a-hole teenager, so this is not me now. But I remember like resenting those people, being like, oh, you're trying too hard and what's the point? But pretty much all those people that like had that personality, that kind of Leslie Knope, that Reese Witherspoon election personality, they all went on to be pretty successful, or they're out there doing it. So props to that. But yeah, in high school, gosh, it is hard to get people to care about student politics.
You have to wonder, is the United States just a high school and Hillary Clinton was running it? I don't know, because that was the vibe I honestly got from the movie, was because I agree with you. I didn't do anything student council wise, or I always kind of thought, oh, they're just tryhards and they're too involved and blah blah blah. But that movie, you just see a girl who just wants to care. Everyone doubts her, and the public is always trying to expose her. And I'm just like, Hillary Clinton. So yeah, cool. Well, so give me another thought. What's another one on your?
Well, this one's actually a documentary, and it's The War Room from 1992. Well, I think it was released in 93, but it's filmed over Bill Clinton's 1992 campaign. And you don't follow Bill Clinton, you follow his campaign staff, specifically George Stephanopoulos and James Carville, who, after this movie, became household names. But it's an inside look at how they got Bill Clinton into the White House, and how it changed Democratic political strategy, and really just like political strategy in the United States, forever. I mean, if you think about before Clinton, the Democrats really didn't have strong presidential candidates. I mean, the last successful one was Jimmy Carter, who was a one-term president that was not very well liked at the end of his term. And before that, you're going back to, Lyndon B. Johnson, who was also not very well liked at the end of his term. And you didn't really have, so for almost 2 decades, you really didn't have any strong Democratic candidates, and you really didn't have a strong Democratic platform with a political strategy that was effective. It really just wasn't, but coming out of the Reagan era into the 90s with Bill Clinton, people like James Carville and people like George Stephanopoulos completely changed the way they run political campaigns. And the way they did it was, aggressive politics, going on the offensive, and really hammering slogans, quick sound bites and slogans, which now today we see all the time that is essential to an effective campaign. So some of the slogans back then was, "It's the economy, stupid," which is probably James Carville's most famous line ever. He's on the phone with a journalist, and you're like, what are the most important things about this election? It's the economy, stupid. It's the economy, right? It's just simple. It's just super memorable. And then, there's behind the scenes look at Stephanopoulos after the debates where he says Bush was on the defensive. Everyone in the campaign needs to repeat this message. Keep repeating it. Bush was on the defensive. So then they anytime they're talking to reporters, how do you think they did in the debates? Well, Bush was on the defensive this time. We had him on the ropes. He was on the defensive. And then the other guy in the campaign says, Bush was on the defensive. They hammer home slogans. There's another scene where they're in the war room discussing how do they go against Bush's H.W. Bush's dealings with some Brazilian company or whatever, and they're like, what's the soundbite? Where does the soundbite? Bush has a new jobs plan. Just a shame it's in Rio de Janeiro. They're just always trying to find these simple soundbite sentences that people can really latch onto, and we see that all the time today. I mean, "Make America Great Again" is one of the best political slogans in recent history. Super effective. You put it on a hat, and it's sold like hotcakes. And that kind of politics, obviously it's been around, but it was mastered by James Carville, George Stephanopoulos, and the War Room gives the outsider a really intense look at what goes on behind the scenes in the campaign. And I thought it was just brilliant. It's just a really fun documentary, but also a little scary. It's a little scary. Like George Stephanopoulos at one point is like, there's a reporter calling him at like 2 days before the election, blackmailing Clinton about like an extramarital like black son, and George Stephanopoulos says, "If you print this story, you will never work in Democratic politics again." And, like threats like that. And he says, "Look, you'll do the right thing. You're not dishonoring yourself. If you back away from this story, you'll be rewarded. I can't personally reward you anything." Like he backs away. He's all like super careful about what he says, but he basically threatens them like, "You run this story, you'll never get access to any Democratic politician or any political machine entry at all ever." It was like, wow, damn. And that was on camera. I mean, he knew he was being recorded by a documentary crew. So just a really intense look at campaign strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I have not seen it. I've heard of this, and I think it was another podcast I was listening to, at least this month. They were actually mentioning this. And yeah, I mean, like the little I know of Clinton's campaign, especially Carville and George Stephanopoulos, I mean, it really does seem like, yeah, you're correct. Is that really was kind of a beginning change in kind of just how a campaign is run? And also, I mean, yeah, you're right. This was one of the really successful Democratic campaigns in a long time. And it is interesting to see, and I've been thinking this for a long time, is that I think a lot of Trump's playbook when it came to messaging and marketing really did start in the 90s under Clinton. Yeah. And unfortunately, other parts of it also might have started in the 90s. But yeah, I mean, I do think you're correct that I would argue, and I mean, we could definitely, dive into this. I don't really have any research, but I would just say that I think Clinton, in some ways, his presidency kind of started this new age of politics. And it's interesting to see. So I'm going to add that to my list because I've definitely heard it recommended a lot. So I think that'd be a cool one to check out. Absolutely.
Well, and there's also a great parody of it. Have you ever seen the show Documentary Now with like Bill Hader?
I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a great parody of it too, where it's the James Carville character shoots himself in the leg to get the guy elected. Like It's actually really hilarious. But yeah, definitely watch the original one. It's really good.
And I mean, James Carville, I mean, he still goes on, Real Time with Bill Maher, and I've seen him on other, obviously CNN and MSNBC and blah blah blah. And he is a very strategic man, a genius, and he's had some warnings right now. I remember when Bernie was leading the Democratic Party, back in I guess February or March now. I mean, he had some warnings about where the party's going. I mean, he is definitely what I would consider a traditional establishment Democrat, and it's kind of been nice during these crazy times to kind of have him weigh in again, because I feel like during at least Obama's years, he was a little bit more checked out, but now he's definitely kind of back into the light a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's a political strategist, I don't think he's not an idealist. So if he sees like the progressive left, he's like, look, you might believe what you want to believe, but it's not electable. He's got a point. And Bernie Sanders lost. What do you know? All right. Well, what's next on your list?
I have two more, so okay. So this is one that's called The Ghostwriter. And I think you and I have talked about it. It's probably honestly one of my favorite movies, actually on my list, like in general, not just political movies, but it's called The Ghostwriter. It's one of Roman Polanski's later movies, and I know he's a controversial figure, and probably rightfully so, but he is a very talented director. And this movie, I think, came out in 2010, and it's with Pierce Brosnan and Ewan McGregor. And it's a really fascinating story about Ewan McGregor's a ghostwriter, and Pierce Brosnan plays the ex-PM, or Prime Minister, of the UK, and his name is Prime Minister Adam Lang. Basically, Adam Lang is retiring, and the old ghostwriter for his memoirs dies mysteriously. So Ewan McGregor becomes his new ghostwriter. So he moves out to the Lang's house on Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts to write the book. And it's a creepy little house out on an island, blowing rain, misty all the time. And while it's a good mystery, what the cooler thing is that there's a lot of parallels and a lot of complexity to Adam Lang, the ex-prime minister, Pierce Brosnan's character. And I'm not going to give away any spoilers because I recommend everyone to watch it. But Ewan McGregor starts digging while he's writing this book, and he finds a lot of mysterious stuff going on. And it's interesting because the screenplay was written with Polanski by what's his name, Tony Blair, one of the ex-prime ministers of the UK's best-selling author, Robert Harris, who wrote the memoir for Tony Blair. And so Blair, basically, Pierce Brosnan's supposed to be playing a mix of Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush, and Tony Blair.
Okay, yeah.
And it's really interesting because all these dots you really couldn't put together by themselves. But Tony Blair, or not Tony Blair, but Adam Lang, Pierce Brosnan's character, he was an actor in the 40s and 50s who was a progressive. And then as he gets older, he gets into politics and changes his cause, gets tied up in the CIA and all this kind of shady stuff going on in Nicaragua and all this. And the interesting part is that I think what the movie shows is that it demonstrates the complexity of political figures, like, I mean, Ronald Reagan, progressive actor turned like B-movie cowboy star to then a very conservative governor to a president. And kind of you get this same story from Adam Lang in this movie, where he's this progressive, protester in the 50s in London, who then, becomes a very conservative prime minister of the UK, who, is involved in 9/11 conspiracies with the CIA and stuff. And it's just a fascinating movie. I think it's one of the best political thrillers I've ever seen. And I can't do it much justice describing it in a short speed, but it's something worth watching. And the ending leaves a lot to be desired, but it does show that Polanski, as troubled as he is, he really gets the best writers and he gets the best just ideas about character.
Yeah, I saw. I'm like you with Citizen Kane. I saw that movie with Ewan McGregor like a decade ago, years ago. I need to really watch it again because that sounds super fascinating. And that theme is really, important, right? That political figures are complex and change, and might even begin with good intentions, but down the road, power corrupts. Citizen Kane's the same kind of thing. At the beginning of Citizen Kane, he's talking about I'm there for the working man, I'm there for the underprivileged, and then at the end of the movie, he's in a luxurious compound mansion he's completely separated from the average man, and he dies sad and alone. So that theme is super important, right? That political figures are complex people, they're flawed people, and power can corrupt.
Yeah, definitely. And yes, I definitely recommend watching it again. I recommend everyone to watch it. And it's true. I mean, I think that's the key, is that I think a lot of people think of just, a lot of politicians are like a glacier. They kind of don't really do much in their life and kind of stay frozen in the same position. But people really change. It's really interesting to see, especially on the conservative side, to see some of these more conservative governors and presidents who in their early days maybe were out protesting with everyone else on the, towards progress and stuff. And I think the movie just shows it is really interesting to see how, kind of reality jades us all, I guess.
Yeah, well, I'm a big Ewan McGregor fan, especially in Star Wars. So I'd love to check that out. I gotta rewatch that. I'll put that on the list. Probably my let's see, how much time have we got here? Yeah, so probably my last one for my submissions, I guess, is 2018's Vice. Christian Bale playing Dick Cheney. Super good movie. A lot of it is true. Obviously, Hollywood does its thing, but a lot of that film has actually been confirmed to be true through other sources, and it's crazy the political cunning of Dick Cheney, his friendship with Donald Rumsfeld, who's played by Steve Carell, which is actually really interesting, but just how unlike other vice presidents he was, right? Vice president, most vice presidents, and the joke is it's kind of just a show of a position. You go to some meetings, you have maybe a little project here and there, but you're really not you're really not actually involved in much of the decision making, and Secretary of State is way more involved in actual politics and diplomacy than the vice president is. Very often. However, in the case of Dick Cheney, he turned that completely on his head, and he almost had an agreement with Bush that was like, look, I'll handle foreign policy, I'll handle the military, I'll handle this and that usually the vice president doesn't handle on his own. And it was just a really good movie to see the life of Dick Cheney and how he became one of the most powerful CEOs, of Halliburton, one of the most powerful vice presidents in American history, and what that meant for American politics with things like the Patriot Act, the Iraq War, and the consolidation of power into the executive branch following 9/11. Super fascinating. I'm always a fan of Christian Bale too. He's one of the best actors I think ever, and he's surrounded by a good cast. Just a super good. I watched it on a plane, so I dove into it. It was great. It's one of the best plane movies I've ever seen. But I really recommend Vice for people that don't know a lot about Dick Cheney and always wonder why he comes up almost as much as George W. Bush when you're talking about that era. It's because he was a major player. Unlike a Joe Biden to an Obama, where it was pretty much just Obama doing the work. Dick Cheney was pretty much on par with George Bush behind the scenes, at least.
All right. Yeah, I'll just quickly respond because there's one more movie I feel like I just have to throw in for the timeliness of what's happening, but like right now with the pandemic and everything. But first, yeah, I think that was an amazing movie as well. I totally agree with you. I watched that in Spain in Spanish, so I've actually never seen Christian Bale say the lines, I guess. It was all a guy who dubbed over to sound like Christian Bale, which was not true, but it was, yeah, I agree with you, man. Amazing movie. And it's true. I mean, I think Dick Cheney, love him or hate him, is a fascinating figure, especially as a vice president, because, there's the unitary executive theory, right? And it really seems like he maximized that to the best extent. I mean, this is, a theory that says that the president possesses the power to control the entire executive branch, and Dick Cheney, I think, kind of saw himself as an adjacent force to that. And he was able to use potentially the power of a president who was maybe ill-prepared for a crisis and really took advantage of it. And he's a smart guy. I mean, I disagree with a lot of the Iraq war things that I definitely believe he helped initiate, but fascinating guy nonetheless. So, yeah. And so the one movie I was debating if I wanted to mention it or not, but I feel like I need to, is V for Vendetta.
Ooh.
I mean, this is the only movie where the mask of one of the protagonists has actually been a real life symbol of political change. You had Anonymous, the Anonymous movement, and Occupy Wall Street. This mask was also used, and now we've seen it time and time again during the pandemic. And I hate to say it, but at one time when I first saw this movie, I think it came out in the mid or early 2000s, right? I felt like it was weird and too far, too much, because it's set in 2020. But god damn, looking at it now, like, the film is 2020 London, and London is under an authoritarian rule of this Nazi-like party called the Norse Fire Party. And basically there's a virus called the St. Mary's virus, which has been unleashed. And it's basically crippled the world's economies and has caused civil war. And so this government has come to power promising security, and people have got rid of their democratic values in exchange for security. So you see this Orwellian aesthetic, and it's creepy because it's a timeless veneer that it's created in. Like, you don't know if this movie was 1950, 1850, or 2020. Like, it's this timeless feel of what happens when a government gets too much authority during a crisis. And obviously, I'm not trying to talk about, I think, coronavirus is some made-up virus. But the movie's a good warning to what happens when the state starts over-monopolizing authority and security. And, it's a movie that I watched finally again after like 10 years a couple weeks ago. And it's haunting. There are messages we should get from it. And I feel like if Orwell was to direct a movie, this would be his movie.
Yeah. I really need to see it. I've been recommended V for Vendetta 100 times by various people. And I've never seen it. I really got to watch that film. I mean, I do know, just based off of that symbolism of that mask, that has been co-opted by so many different movements. Like you said, Anonymous, Occupy Wall Street, even like libertarianism. Pretty much like any anti-establishment, anti-big government movement, resonates with that mask. And that alone shows the power of that film because, real world implications and real world groups adopt that symbolism. There you go. That's a successful film right there.
No, I definitely agree. It's worth watching. It's a little disturbing because obviously it doesn't predict everything well, but we are seeing kind of a breakdown of like a lot of people are willing to trade like their rights for security, right? And that's kind of what this movie kind of acme is that this is what happens when that goes too far. So yeah, definitely worth watching. And yeah, that mask is everywhere, and unfortunately we're probably going to see a lot more of that mask.
Yeah, certainly. Well, let's get a couple honorable mentions in here. One of mine was season 1 and only season 1 of House of Cards. Good look at congressional whips and the influence of lobbyists in politics. But obviously it goes off the rails in the later seasons with murdering journalists and stuff. Not necessarily common with American congressmen. Maybe if you're Putin. And then a couple other honorable mentions that I haven't seen that I think I should is Primary Colors, Wag the Dog, and the one you said actually, The Candidate. I guess The Candidate is with Robert Redford.
Great movie.
Yeah.
Great movie as well.
Any other honorable mentions before we wrap this episode up?
Yeah, Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying About and Loving the Bomb.
Nice.
When Stanley Kubrick first set out to adapt the novel Red Alert, he was going to make it a drama, but he ended up making it a comedy. And some people say if The Manchurian Candidate is the Cold War era's finest thriller, this might be its best comedy. So definitely watch that. And Charlie Wilson's War is the other one. Not super authentic, but it's a good dark comedy on how Charlie Wilson, the U.S. Texas representative, helped fund the Taliban and the Mujahideen.
Wow, very cool. All right. Well, for those listening and in the chat live here on Twitch, let us know some of your favorite political movies. Did we miss any? Do you disagree with some of our opinions? Obviously, these are just opinions, and it's subjective. But we can glean a lot about our reality, even from fiction films, and I think that stays true regarding politics as well. So thank you again for listening to this episode of the Tonic Accord. If you're watching live, we're going to go right into the next episode about Chinese investment and dealings in Africa and kind of the situation, what's going on in Africa. And for those listening or recorded, that episode will be coming up in a few days as well.
Peace.